Well, good evening. Thanks so much for joining Wear Blue Run Tree Member and UCAN in our second session of our speaker series. And I'm excited tonight to introduce Lauren Mitchell, a registered dietitian, who will be joining Pete Rea and myself. Pete Rea is a coach at Zap Endurance Distance Running and just comes to us with a wealth of experience from coaching professional athletes. And Lauren is an incredibly talented and accessible dietitian who's been helping runners for years. And so today we're just going to take some time to dive into nutrition. Lauren, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, hello. Thank you again for having me here. I am a current registered dietitian in Aspen, Colorado. I also can help customers with UCAN related questions as well. I work with athletes through consulting. So I work with all different types of athletes, runners, weightlifters, even ninja warriors, American Ninja Warrior athletes. But in my day job as well, I am a clinical registered dietitian. So I see patients anywhere from like obesity, post-surgery, post-op, or even like in an outpatient setting as well.
Great, great. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I know I have some questions for you, and just our community at large is excited to learn more. Pete, thanks for joining us again. Things going well in North Carolina?
Yeah, it's good to be back. It's a beautiful day here in Blowing Rock. We saw some 20s this morning here in Appalachia, and it's a great day.
Great, great. And as a reminder, this series is presented by Wear Blue Run Tree Member, which is a national running community that honors the service and sacrifice of the American military. And it's presented in partnership with UCAN, nutrition that delivers long-lasting energy without the spike and crash. But Lauren, I've got a ton of questions for you today, and I'm so excited that you're joining us. But if you could just start today and give us just, what does nutrition mean for an athlete?
Yeah, great question. So nutrition for the athlete and, nutrition for the general health of the population is so important and so vital to how we feel during the day, how we exercise and perform. It has an impact on obviously how we weigh, our labs as well, and has a huge impact especially on how we perform as the athlete. So it has a big play on what fuel we're burning throughout the day and how we can hit those, indicators when we are exercising.
Great. Pete, you work with professional athletes from around the world. What does athlete mean? What does nutrition mean for your athletes?
A couple things. One, nutrition is the fuel from which athletes drive, and the athletes I work with are most are marathon runners. Some run quote unquote shorter races like 5,000 and 10,000 meter races, but they're all long distance races. And so as an endurance athlete, what you put in your body is hugely important about your daily energy levels, as well as the big one that we're learning more and more about, as Lauren knows, is recovery too. And you finish a workout, whether it's a 2-mile run or whether it's a 20-mile run, and what nutrition to put in your body post workout.
That's great. That's great. So Lauren, let's start with the basics. So Wear Blue Run Tree Member is a community of athletes of all abilities. I saw on our social page a Gold Star mom who has been running 100-mile races all summer. And then we also have novice athletes who are training for and conquering their first 5Ks. And so we really are seeing this gamut. And so when I think about nutrition, let's just start with some of the basics. What should we be thinking about when we're going out for our daily training runs?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Nutrition is so personable and individualized, and there are so many nutrition experts out there. So it's really important to go to the right people for the right information. But some of the big things with nutrition and training, a lot of people tend to overfuel and eat more calories than they need. So there's a big difference in energy expenditure of training for a 100-mile race versus trying that first 5K. Some of the big things for training, and a lot of people kind of overdo, is that over supplementation. So if you're exercising, that general rule of thumb is if you're exercising less than 90 minutes, you do not need to supplement. If you're exercising over that 90-minute time frame, that's when we want to really get into that personalized nutrition of what you're having, what fuel specifically can help you. But what I do also as a dietitian is help the athlete, no matter what they're training for, what race or competition or lifting, whatever, to help align their dietary intake throughout the day to support their exercise, whether it's like a 30-minute weightlifting, then a run, or a long distance run. Because Pete, like you said, that your nutrition, what you have during the day, is so important to how you race and perform at exercise.
So let's look real quick at that. There's two pieces of this population. We've got the 5K runner, and then let's say the marathoner, and there's a range of everywhere in between, because I also know there's the marathoners who are competing like the athletes on Pete's team. Well, let's think about that 5K athlete for just a minute. They're about to go out for, let's say, probably somewhere between a 25 and a 45-minute run. How soon or how close to their workout should they be eating, and what should they be eating before they go out for that run?
Yeah, and so I think the biggest thing we'll keep saying today is how individualized it needs to be. But when I first work with patients or clients, I look at their schedule. You know, when are they fitting this run in? Is it first thing in the morning, or if it's in the afternoon, or if it's after a lunch? But in general, I usually suggest having some type of balanced meal with like a protein, a healthy fat, and fiber anywhere from about 4 hours before, to allow for proper digestion. But, you know, with busy schedules and like, let's say you're leaving work and need to squeeze a run in, having something, if you're only able to have like an hour before exercise, having more of like a slow release, easy to digest type of fuel would be really important. Something like that UCAN energy. But it all is dependent on athlete's schedule.
Okay, so you just went dietitian speak, which is great, but break it down
Right.
for me for just a minute. So when we talk about protein, healthy fats, and fiber, give me a couple just quick examples. What am I going to go into my kitchen and find on my shelves? Just nothing special purchased. What's already on my shelves that would meet those qualifiers?
Yeah, so you're right. I did go in dietitian speak. So to back it up, in general, all your meals and snacks, the goal throughout the day for, you know, healthy nutrition and fueling your workouts, we want to balance our blood sugars. So we want to help us make us feel full with protein, which can come from animal or plant-based products. Fiber, ideally coming from produce like our vegetables, our fruits, whole grains, and healthy fats. That can be anything like avocados, nuts and seeds, olives, nut butters, cooking oils, etc. But that combination of having small meals and snacks of those together can balance your blood sugar. So it can help you feel full, and it can help you with your workouts too. So something quick, like if you have enough time to digest, and the reason why we want to have this time to digest our meal before we're exercising is we don't want to have GI distress or we don't want to, you know, have the gas, the bloating, or the need to use a bathroom very urgently. Also GI distress. So
Truth.
yeah, so like even a quick meal, like if you have time to have a meal, and then let's say you're running maybe 3 hours after this small meal, maybe it's like a cup of Greek yogurt and like a little handful of nuts. That has some protein, fiber, and healthy fats from the nuts too. Or it could be a quick breakfast, like, I don't know, 2 eggs and some vegetables that has your healthy protein and fat and nuts too. Again, going back to athlete specific, we want to make sure that the athlete can digest this. It doesn't cause them gas while they're running. But that is kind of that meal we want to have, or meal or snack. But having a quick source of protein or fat source, like an hour before you run or exercise, can also cause you to feel that stomach urgency where you have to use the restroom. That's not the fuel we want to have right before we exercise.
Great. So we're going to want to fuel before our workout about 60 minutes before then. And I'm going to want to make sure that I've got a protein, a healthy fat, and a fiber in that. And that's going to help give me slow release energy that will minimize
So
bloating,
I would
gas, and distress.
I would think about that meal or snack as like if you have a couple of hours before you
Okay.
exercise.
Okay.
You don't want to eat that type of meal right before that 60 minutes. Right before that 60 minutes is more of a carb specific meal. That's the
Okay.
preferred use of energy right before we run.
And is that where we go back to when I think about running and getting ready for my big training? I think of a banana or some potatoes or maybe a little bit of peanut butter on a piece of toast. Is that where we're moving as we get closer, or are those just wives' tales from the past?
Yeah, so that's a good point. And I'm sure Pete, you can speak on this too. The thing is, right before we run with that goal of carb specific, what athletes tend to turn to is these quick use of fuel, such as like, the gels, sports drinks, energy, the goos or gels or fruit. And the thing is, a lot of times when we break these down and what our body does is these are simple sugars. And so they'll give you a quick use of energy. So I wouldn't usually recommend it right before. There are better choices that, athletes can learn about to use that can provide them more of a sustainable fuel. I've worked with a lot of athletes personally that are used to having that quick fix of energy, that simple sugar right before. And so providing them with the right education of having a balanced meal a couple hours before you exercise and then having the right type of long lasting fuel like UCAN energy, that 60 minutes before is actually a better performance when you're exercising.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Pete, what does this look like for you at your running camps and with your athletes?
Yeah, I would say it goes two ways, which is, the athletes who live here at ZAP and train full time, these are people running twice a day, most days. And their first run of the day, which is early in the morning, well, not necessarily truly early, but it's about 7 a.m., 7:30 in the morning. Most of the Wear Blue people are probably saying, geez, do you think that's early? I'm up at 4. But Lauren's right. So if you don't have the time to be up 2 hours before a run, if you're rolling out of bed 45 minutes to an hour and you do need something, you need some calories, you want to have something that's easily digestible that won't give you a big spike. So, it's actually one of the reasons we really do like UCAN. There's not a lot of, the sugar is non-existent. You don't get that crazy, weird hypoglycemic spike. But in the absence even of UCAN, our athletes really like things like, it might be something as simple as half a banana with a tablespoon of peanut butter on it. Now, why would you put peanut butter on it? It's got a little bit of protein. It'll actually slow the absorption of the sugar. So even for the people who get, and there are those people who will get like a weird spike. We've all had that where you feel almost a little dizzy. Something like a little bit of peanut butter or hummus can actually delay that absorption and make you feel a little bit better throughout the run. And then for the afternoon run, they run again usually around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They can have a more complete meal mid-afternoon, as Lauren was referencing. But I do want to say to everyone who's listening, the idea of simply rolling out of bed, taking 3 steps, putting on your running shoes and going out the door, if it was that or no run at all, I'm a hardcore coach. I'm going to tell you, go do it anyway. But in an ideal world, eat something before you run, put some calories in. And then for those who drink coffee, which is, I don't know, is there anyone in the world who doesn't drink coffee? Actually, a little bit of caffeine is not a bad thing. And be curious to hear what Lauren has to say about this. But one great thing about the 3,000-year-old drug of caffeine is it actually reduces what's called perceived exertion. So a little bit of caffeine, you'll actually feel a little better on your run than if you didn't take any caffeine at all. So if you're not a coffee drinker, maybe you don't start, but a little bit of a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, 45 minutes or an hour before you go out the door can be a good thing.
Lauren,
Yeah.
I would love for you to endorse my coffee right now. Tell me,
Right.
is what Pete's saying true?
Yeah, there is some really good studies, like a little bit of caffeine intake, and we're not talking like a 30-ounce thing of coffee. We're talking about like ideally plain black coffee, not a lot of fat added through like cream or half and half. But this is something, coffee is it can have a laxative effect, so it might cause you have to use the restroom. So this is something that you should trial before you go into like a race day. I'm sure your athletes are trialing this before practice so they can allow enough time if they need to use the restroom before they're exercising.
Right. The old adage is nothing new on race day
Yes,
ever. And that's why
yeah.
we have training runs. And I always encourage, when I work with my youth in the mentorship program, you want to fall apart on a training run, because then you know what works and what doesn't work. So it's a great place to figure out the right nutrition equation that works for you, so that when you do get to race day, you know what's normal and what's not normal.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is, we started with this 5K athlete, but we have so many of our athletes are half marathoners, and ultra marathoners. What does this mean? Should I be double, tripling, and quadrupling my calorie intake as I'm doubling, tripling, and quadrupling the mileage that I'm hitting in a training run or throughout the week? How
Yeah.
do you relate calories to exertion?
Yeah, so that is a great question. First of all, I would say I get that question a lot. You want to start out and see what the athlete's goal is. I mean, of course, there's probably a performance indicator, but if we're talking about body composition wise, if the goal is weight loss, if it's losing percent body fat, if it's gaining muscle, any type of changing of body composition, we want to that is a very important for their calorie intake, I would say, prior, like a month or two before they actually race. But when I work with athletes, I always ask, what is that goal, their performance goal? What is their body composition goal? Because that is how I can help them on exactly how much they eat. But a good way to look at it is if how many minutes you're exercising with the proportion of what you should be eating during the day. So when I work with athletes, depending on if they're usually with the longer training distance, you might have a couple of days where you're hitting over those 90 minutes, anywhere closer to like 180, 360, depending on the training. So on those days specifically with that higher energy output, that's when we might need more of the energy through our nutrition. And so we want to balance the amount of proteins we're having with our carbohydrates of our fruits and our vegetables and grains and healthy fats. But I also teach athletes how much to eat depending on their hands too, because that has a big play. Like a general serving of protein for an athlete is about the palm of their hand. Yes, yeah, it's good. It works for males and females, because of the size difference too. But then I show them the amount of more of our carbohydrate intake, the servings they should have depending on how many minutes they're expending too. So it is very specific on the time of energy you're exercising.
Okay. Pete, you work with a variety of athletes. Do you see this as a pretty consistent rule of thumb with how your athletes are engaging in their nutrition?
Yeah, everything that Lauren said, and then if I might add, I would say to your original question, look, the more you're running, I mean, you're obviously burning more. Somebody who's running, these are big numbers, but somebody who's running more like 50 to 60 miles a week is obviously going to be burning more than someone who's running a few miles 3 times a week, right? But to Lauren's point, you're right. What's the goal? So is the goal wholeheartedly performance oriented? Is the goal maybe a little bit of weight loss? I mean, I've found that with most people who get into a regular running program or run walk program, the weight's going to start coming off on its own if you're making healthy nutritional decisions. But what I really wanted to add was something that we touched on briefly last week with the talk with Coach Bremer, which is the frequency of caloric intake. And this is an area that performance-based nutritionists around the world have probably learned the most of any aspect of nutrition in the last decade. And that's that we don't want to have big windows where there are no calories at all. It's the classic American diet. I get up, I don't eat breakfast, I don't eat anything till 1, and then at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I have 3 slices of turkey, and then before I go to bed, I eat 6 plates of pasta. I mean, it's, if that's America, right? If you can spread those calories out, and it's hard for working people, right? I mean, you're telling me to eat 5 little meals. How the heck can I do that? I know it's difficult, but if you can manage your schedule such that you say, hey, I'm a 40-year-old male running 20 to 25 miles a week with an average metabolic rate. So I'm looking at burning somewhere between 17 and 1900 calories a day. Should I take that all in after 6 o'clock at night? Absolutely not. See if you can spread that out into 5 little meals. And as Dr. Dan Benardot from Georgia State University likes to tell our athletes, he said, look, we're always told snacking is a bad thing. Snacking is not a bad thing. It's just certain types of snacks can necessarily be bad things, and you don't want to do it all the time. But if you have that little snack right after you finish your run in the morning, and then in the middle of the afternoon you have a handful of cashews or peanuts or almonds, and then maybe right before you go to bed you have a couple of nibbles of something, you'll prevent those giant windows of 10, 12 hours of no calories at all. Because when you have that, you have what's called cortisol released into your bloodstream, and that's a stress hormone, and it actually tears down lean muscle mass. And we all like to be lean and fit and look good.
Yeah. And going off that, I always tell people the normal range for biological hunger is about every 3 to 5 hours.
Huh.
So it's good to have some type of small meal or snack with that, protein in it about every 3 to 5 hours. And so that at first time can start whenever you have breakfast, which is whenever someone eats something in the morning. It doesn't have to be like, it has to be at a certain time, but breakfast is literally breaking the fast from overnight. So after that first meal, every 3 to 5 hours, planning for some type of meal or snack can really balance your blood sugar too.
So, Lauren, that drives me into, I have a ton of friends who are currently doing intermittent fasting and having tons of success with that. What does intermittent fasting mean for the athlete?
Yeah, so I mean that's a really great question as well. It is more of a fad I see a lot. In general, weight loss occurs from a calorie deficit. So weight and fat loss in general, some type of calorie deficit. Intermittent fasting, if someone chooses to do that, it might be a good thing for them because they stop eating calories at a certain time at night, which can help contribute to eating less calories than your body expends, which can cause weight or body fat loss. But athlete specific, if you have a very active athlete that's hitting those 60, 70-mile weeks, it might be hard for them to get their proper total calories in a time constraint window. And it might be hard for them to get the right amount of nutrients, like your proteins, all your vitamins and minerals and everything. But for someone that, might be running more of that beginner mileage, like lower end, like maybe less than 20, if they have a start and stop time of eating, they might contribute to their weight goals because they're creating that calorie deficit. And also exercising can help contribute to that calorie deficit. But for body composition goals, to achieve them, it is 80% nutrition of what you're eating or creating that deficit through nutrition.
Great, great. Well, you said two words, vitamins and minerals, and they're a little bit scary to me because I'm one of those athletes. It's 65-mile weeks. And so I kind of jokingly say, either A, I'm a garbage can at this point, or B, I can get away with it. So what does quality mean at this point in my training, or for any of our athletes who have really high mileage going right now? Does quantity matter, or is that cronut that I had for breakfast okay?
Yeah, I think so the big idea, we want more of our quality-based foods coming from our produce and, our vegetables, our fruits, and our whole grains. Technically, like you can have a meal that, might be 500 calories. Like let's say if you have a lead piece of grilled chicken, you have broccoli, nuts sprinkled on top, that might be the same calories as maybe like 2 cups of potato chips. So technically they're the same amount of calories, but it doesn't mean they're the same on a nutrient level of our fiber and our vitamins and minerals. Eating a colorful, rich diet, so having a lot of color on your plates from fruits and vegetables, can help give your body the nutrients the vitamins and minerals it needs for recovery. So recovery is one of the best things we can do, especially putting in those long mile weeks. And I mean, if you think about our current environment right now with how stressful it is, getting the proper amount of sleep, fueling yourself up with the right amount of food can really be a protective effect on the body. And especially with athletes, you're putting a lot of stress on your body. It's good, healthy stress, you know, like in the way that your programs are designed, but fueling yourself up with the right nutrients can really, you know, help your body recover and also power for the next day.
So when you say recovery, I also think that when my mileage goes up pretty high, that I'm more susceptible to getting sick, right? You're navigating some fatigue as that mileage goes up. When you talk about recovery, are we talking about health and wellness? How quickly we can run fast again? What does recovery mean?
Yeah, so recovery is almost everything. It's anything from like sleep. Sleep is one of the most important things we can do for our body because it does reset, but also recovery with that sports nutrition. So getting the right amount of fuel after you exercise, getting yourself enough total calories and energy during the day can really help you with that recovery process. And a lot of foods that we eat, if we have that colorful intake of fruits and vegetables, that can help provide anti-inflammatory properties, which can help our body recover as well. So something like fatty fish, like salmon, mackerel, or tuna, has something called omega-3 fatty acids, which provide that anti-inflammatory effect. And plant-based sources would be like walnuts or ground flax seeds or chia. So having a variety of like seeds, different types of proteins in those vegetables can help our body recover on that side too.
Okay, so let's say I hear you, but I still choose to eat the cronut for breakfast and the 2 cups of potato chips. Can I just replace nutrition with a vitamin?
No.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think so. Vitamin needs, again, should be individualized. There are certain age groups that should be taking specific vitamins, you know, like if your childbearing years, a prenatal would be very important too. But if you are taking vitamins like a multivitamin, I would suggest that taking with a meal, more of a balanced meal. But it's not a simple pill. I think the biggest things for athletes in nutrition is finding a balance throughout what you're eating during the day. A multivitamin can be helpful, but it doesn't undo what we're doing during the day. But what you're speaking of is moderation. So, you know, like if you're wanting the potato chips or like I don't know, like croissant that you see in the store, there's nothing wrong with moderation, you know, and that keeps people on track with their goals if they're not 100% perfect or training at like some high level as well. So it is important to go back to what the athlete's goals are. Are they looking more towards 80% eating very healthily and that 20% moderation range? That kind of helps that long-term sustainability with making healthy choices. But I wouldn't say a breakfast like that with potato chips would be the most nutrient dense to power up.
Okay, my nutrition goals have been thwarted, but I think you're right. So we're eating healthy meals, and yes, there is a place for multivitamins, but it is not in lieu of eating that colorful plate of balanced meals and really thinking about recovery smart foods. Pete, let's dive in for just a minute. So we've got this holistic sense of nutrition that is not 2 cups of potato chips. But athletes, there's these common challenges that runners have: nutrition and then performance on the course. What are some challenges some of your athletes face out there running that are stemming from nutrition?
I would say just a couple, but if you don't mind me going back to just the previous question for 1 second, you know, Lauren mentioned, you know, it shouldn't be in lieu of a meal, you know, a vitamin supplement. The Australian Institute of Sport did an interesting study, 2009, 2010, back when they had a runner by the name of Craig Mottram. He was one of the best guys in the world. He broke 13 minutes for 5K. He was very, very good. And he was a little bit the guy who woke up and ate potato chips in the morning. And they were really trying to work with him on the nutritional side for that last 5% of his performance. And they took a look at like nutrient levels based on like, he would take multivitamins, right? But then he would sort of have a crappy diet on the side. And it's not that supplements, it's not that vitamins cannot help, but your body actually flushes out often more than half of the nutritional quality that you'll see on a bottle will actually be absorbed. So it's not that they're not in any way effective, but you're better off with real foods. And I'd never heard the term cronut before, so I like that, Lisa. But listen, in terms of the challenges, like you said, I would say one, it's repetition is a great rhetorical device. So I remind athletes all the time, having some food with them at all times for post-workout. And you guys were just talking about recovery. Yes, sleep is important. Of course, yes, hydration is important, and not just water, but electrolytes as well. But just having, you are going to go out for a run. Maybe it's a 3-mile run. Maybe it's your long run for the week and it's 10, 12, 15, 18 miles. Have something in your car or in your backpack so that when you finish, you don't just get in your car, drive home, take a shower, you've got kids running around, and next thing you know, you look at your watch and it's been 2 hours since you finished your workout. Have something in your bag. Have a UCAN bar in your bag, or some UCAN energy mixed up in a water bottle. Have a piece of fruit with you. And yeah, a lot of the recent research shows, like, if it's a difference between eating nothing at all and the only thing you happen to have in your bag is a Hershey's bar, eat the Hershey's bar, even though I wouldn't recommend that as my number one choice. But it'll actually help with recovery. So getting athletes to remember the challenges you asked about, Lisa, getting them to remember, hey, this is part of my task here, is the nutritional side, not just the ability to go out and run 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 miles hard. I know they can do that part, but are they ready for the other part, which is preparing to do it well and preparing to recover from it well? And then I guess the other part for us, and this is more the high performance end that maybe Lauren can speak to a bit more, but there are 2 big areas of nutritional deficiency, 2, in almost every performance-based long-distance runner, and particularly one with women. And those 2 are iron and vitamin D. And with those, it is astounding the percentage of female athletes who are low in iron. And vitamin D, because we're all told that we're supposed to wear, sunblock number 50, and not absorb any direct sunlight. And if you're like us and you run early in the morning in the mountains where the sun's hardly up anyway, absorbing D and bone growth is very important, because there can be injuries like stress fractures. Getting enough vitamin D is another area that a lot of Americans are very deficient. So getting a blood panel done and taking a look at where your levels are. But vitamin D and iron are two areas where most people could benefit from having more. And maybe Lauren could speak to that.
Yeah, and going off that vitamin D as well, if we live below the 37th parallel, especially in the United States, we kind of absorb less vitamin D after those summer months. So most people are more at risk to be vitamin D insufficient and deficient. So after those summer months, that's when our body makes most of that vitamin D. It is good to get it checked out with, especially vitamin D. Beyond just bone health, it can help with your muscle health, recovery, cognitive function as well. And there's also really good studies now with vitamin D and our body's ability to have adaptive immunity, which is a hot topic right now as well. Vitamin D isn't in a ton of our foods. It might be in some mushrooms. That is very dependent on how much sunlight and UV exposure the mushrooms have before they hit the grocery store. It can be in fortified.
Wow, I didn't know that.
As well. Yeah, fun fact. But I mean, it can be in fortified products as well, like dairy. It can be in some, like fatty fish, but it is really good to have that checked out. That's a lab value that you would have to ask your primary care to have it added on. It's not a normal drawn, but a lot of people are insufficient. And so that's a good range or a good value to have looked at.
And Lisa, if I can just throw one thing on for the people who are listening in your group who happen to have youth athletes. When I coached on the high school level, we had all of the athletes on our team get just a basic iron test to look at both hemoglobin and your iron stores, what's called your serum ferritin. And we had a very large team where I coached. We had 100 kids, if you can believe this, on the high school cross country team.
Oh, wow.
And more than 80 of them were highly deficient in iron. So many of them took a basic iron supplement, and the sheer level of how an athlete will feel with higher iron levels just on a day-to-day basis, their overall energy, iron has a direct impact. So again, not everyone is iron deficient, but again, it's one of those things that we test commonly a few times a year here at ZAP with our athletes. And even for the typical athlete on the street, I really recommend having someone take a look at your your iron levels, and they'll take a look at what's called nanograms per milliliter of blood to see where your levels are.
Yeah, and that testing your iron, that's something on like a general lab panel that can be done by your physician as well. I wouldn't recommend taking an iron supplement unless you know you are insufficient or deficient, because taking too much iron, just having that check. But if you're not having enough iron, symptoms of not having enough iron, is that low energy, feeling very tired during the day, pale skin, you could bruise easily. So those are all things, especially that for our women and young children to be looking out for, and even our males. But we see common iron deficiency or low iron, especially in those teenage young women years. And I would say early 20s to 30s, we see that very often. So it is really important to look at too.
Oh, that's helpful. And I think that's not something that we're readily aware of. So we've seen a couple of those challenges, right? We want to make sure that our vitamin D and our iron is strong. We got to recover well. But there's some common nutrition topics that runners love to address. And I think one is that heavy stomach. You start running and you just feel like a pit. It's off, you're wobbly. What's happening here, and how do we prevent that?
So with the heavy stomach, it can be tied to what you're eating before, right before we run. A lot of things that can, keep in mind when people are running or about to go run, depending on the distance, they might think, oh, I need to eat something right before. And they might gravitate towards maybe heavy items like oatmeal, which seems like really healthy and filling, but something like oatmeal or like a big sandwich right before you eat can feel heavy because it's something that we call complex carbohydrates. And all that means is that it has more grams of carbohydrate. And so since it has more grams, it takes longer for your body to digest it because it also has more fiber. So when you're eating food like that right before, because if you think that you need to have that right before you exercise, it can actually weigh you down and cause that gas and everything while you're exercising. So common that a lot of people think that you need to have these really heavy starchy items or a bowl of pasta or something like that right before you run. That's not necessarily the case. So I think it's a good thing that we're talking about today is kind of breaking those old stereotypes of like having something right before you run, like that you don't necessarily need to have that.
Okay, so I mean, it's back to the basics. I'm kind of seeing this thematically is that I'm ideally in a perfect world, 2 hours before I work out, we're having protein, healthy fat, fiber. 1 hour before I work out is that simple carb, something like a UCAN bar before I go, and then we're moving into that. And while I'm exercising, if it's less than 90 minutes, I really don't need to think about adding nutrition into that. That can just be a water only run. Is that capturing that right?
Yeah, I would say and again, depending on like let's athlete schedule. If you're waking up at 6 because you're getting the kids ready and that's when you can have a breakfast, but you're not running till 11. So that's kind of that's a 5-hour range. And if you are a very active person, you're most likely going to be hungry after you eat something at 6. So that's where if you're having that meal, that balanced meal, and then right an hour before having something like UCAN Energy that has a slow releasing carbohydrate that's easy on your stomach, won't cause GI distress. Also, a good amount of calories can help give you that energy. So, and I know that's can be kind of confusing, but depending on your schedule is a good point of when you want to have a meal or snack versus having something like UCAN like right before, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Sorry, Pete, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I'm so glad that Lauren just brought up like the GI distress because, good old trial and error in terms of what feels good on your stomach and what doesn't. The sheer number of people who come to our adult running camps here in the summer and complain of just general tummy issues. I have discomfort during my runs, and there's a variety of reasons. There's emerging research now to suggest that genetically modified foods actually have a big a direct impact on how people's tummies can feel with athletes. But yeah, it's a real issue, and for a lot of your Wear Blue folks listening, finding something that's easily digestible that doesn't bother your stomach, it can take a little while, particularly for newer runners. Having like a big, heavy, starchy meal, absolutely. We get that feedback from people like, I don't know what the problem was. I ate this giant plate of pasta half an hour before I ran. Not a good idea. It needs to be something a little lighter if it's close to your run, and a little bit more complete, as you've both mentioned, if it's more like 2 hours before your run.
Hey, Pete, give me real quick. Let's say you're running a marathon or half marathon. Give me 24 hours out. Quick hit. What's lunch the day before, dinner the day before, breakfast the morning of? What does that eating pattern look like for you or for your athletes?
Yeah, to echo the people who listened last week, the first thing I'll say, and I'm stealing Coach Gary Brimmer's words, which is nothing new, okay? So my hope would be when you practice your long runs in marathon preparation, and hopefully you're doing long runs if you're preparing for you should what do the day before. So, the afternoon meal the day before a marathon, let's pretend for you, that's a turkey sandwich with a piece of fruit and some nuts. I'm making that up. If that's what you've been doing the day before for your lunch meal, that's what you should be doing on the Saturday afternoon before a Sunday morning marathon. The night before your marathon, does that mean that you should go to the Marine Corps marathon pasta dinner and have the largest meal of your life when you do not do that before your long runs? The answer is no. Do what you did. Is it a small piece of chicken and some whole wheat pasta? Yes. Don't change what you do. I coached a woman who was a very, very good marathoner in the 1990s. She was a 2:35 marathoner, and the night before the Chicago Marathon, 1995, she decided for the very first time she was going to try Ethiopian food. And I remember, and let's just say the next day she had more than her share of pit stops on the side of the course in Chicago. And again, if she had been eating Ethiopian food the night before every long run, I would have said, great idea, but it was not a good move for Lynn, and it was a day that didn't go well for her. So I'm not sure that I answered you, Lisa, but I would say stick to what you're doing throughout. I know that carbohydrates are indeed important in that last 48-hour window, but don't make it anything that you haven't been doing all the way in the lead up.
Oh, that's great. And nothing new, race day or race weekend. Well, it's no mystery, right? This speaker series is in partnership with UCAN, and there is something different and special about UCAN. And you've talked about it before. It's the slow release concept. Lauren, can you talk us through a little bit what's happening with UCAN and why is this a good nutritional match for athletes?
Yeah, so with UCAN, what we keep emphasizing is that slow release. A lot of times, quick, like fast acting fuel, like goos or gels or shot blocks, what that is and what we call that is like a fast carbohydrate. So it is that the reason why it's a fast carbohydrate is it gives your body that quick energy. So a lot of times with that quick energy coming in the form of like a simple carbohydrate, we feel that rapid increase in your blood sugar. So it gives you some energy, but what we often find with taking something like the quick sugar, it can have that quick decline later when you're running, maybe like 20 to 30 minutes later. So you need another hit or another packet of the goo or another shot block. And so the difference between UCAN, so it is a carbohydrate, which is again the preferred fuel of choice when you are exercising aerobically like this. UCAN is a slow release. So it provides you a consistent amount of energy for a longer period of time. And so technically, especially for going back to that body composition goals as well, for someone who's running very long distance, like maybe it's a 20 mile to 30 mile, they might need to have like 12 to 20 goos, which are 100 calories. But you can, for that one scoop, is also 100 calories, but you're taking in less fuel along the way, but it can provide you with more sustainable energy so you're not crashing, which is the biggest thing. So a lot of times with the quick, rapid acting like goos or gels, you have to constantly refuel or you'll bonk, which, you know, that low of energy. If you don't refuel, then you'll start to feel it. You might have those angry thoughts where you're like, I'm tired, I need to eat, and those negative thoughts. But with UCAN, it can help provide you with that consistent energy. And it's also easy on your stomach. A lot of times with those like goos and gels, what we worry about with for athletes is that they might, you know, not digest it as well because of that the sugars in it. But with UCAN, since it's a slower digesting and slower acting, it's not as harmful on the stomach. So I have seen tons of athletes do the switch of they're constantly using goos and gels, but then if they try something that's easier on their stomach, longer lasting fuel, they actually feel better and less pit stops when they're running.
What I've noticed as the weather's starting to get colder, I eat less food, right? It's just complicated. Your hands are in gloves. What's the value of liquid nutrition or liquid calories versus physical calories? When we're out there on those long runs, should we be eating a UCAN bar or should we be drinking a UCAN beverage or should we be doing them both?
Yeah, so I think it also depends what you're training for and what heart rate you're hitting during these runs. A lot of times if we're hitting very high heart rate, so if you're racing, it's easier to digest more carbohydrate specific, so more of that energy or the powder in the water. If you're able to sustain like a lower heart rate for a longer period of time, your body's going to might be able to digest that bar a little bit better. But it also is athlete dependent and specific. So there are times if I go for like a long trail run, my trail pace, you know, in the mountains is going to be very different than a road marathon pace. I'm going to be more slower on the trail. So on the trail runs, I know with my body, I'm able to digest a UCAN bar that has a little bit of fat in it and a little bit of protein and that wonderful energy coming from that carbohydrate. But if I'm doing a road race where my heart rate is going to be higher and I'm going to be moving a lot faster than a trail, I'm going to want that more specific UCAN energy in the powder and liquid form.
That's great. Pete, what does this look like for your athletes when they're out there racing?
Yeah, just two quick things, which is liquid as opposed to a solid. At least the athletes I'm working with here at ZAP, we practice all of our long runs. We practice the fuel that we're taking in. So again, I would recommend that to all your folks if they're getting ready, particularly for a longer race. You sure as heck don't need to worry about fueling for a 5K or a 10K. You don't. But half marathons and marathons where you're looking at fueling, we practice. You know, it's generally every 30 to 35 minutes. We're taking some carbohydrate in, but the athletes here, it's by and large, it's going to be in liquid form. It's just easier. It's easier to swallow. Although, again, even that takes practice. Being able to have a bottle and put your chosen aid in it, which for us is UCAN. But the athletes here, you know what they like. You know what condiment bottles are. You know, the ones that you see mustard or mayonnaise in. You can get them at Walmart for next to nothing, bottles that exact same size, and they are awesome for mixing up UCAN and just spraying it into your mouth. They're not the giant water bottles where you feel like you're carrying around a bookcase, and they're also not the tiny little ones. They're the medium-sized ones, and they're easy to hold and grab and have a friend hand to you. So we like that size, but generally for our athletes here, it's the liquid. And then to Lauren's point, I just want to say the great thing about UCAN for those who struggle getting up in the morning and actually having any of the proper meals we've been talking about, just having a packet of the UCAN Energy where there's no sugar spike whatsoever, even if that's the only thing that you had 45 minutes to an hour out, with only rare exceptions have we had anyone here have a single issue with their tummy. Pre-workout.
Okay, that's great. So I will be now washing all of my ketchup bottles for reuse in my training cycle.
They work well.
That's a great tip. Let's talk for just a minute. I think the longer I've been running, the more Wear Blue miles that I've stood on cheering athletes through marathons, the more that I've loved about the sport is the diversity of its participants. And when you go to a marathon today, you see every age, every shape, every size. And I think that's dynamic. I think a lot of athletes come to the table and say, I don't look like that Olympian runner. This running is not for me. And so, Lauren, how can you maybe coach us or advise just general healthy nutrition for every body type coming to this table?
Yeah, so some general healthy tips I tell almost every person I work with or any person I meet, that we want to start off, it goes to that lifestyle piece. So planning out your day, do you even have, proteins in your refrigerator? Is there variety? Do you have produce? Are you making a list going to the grocery store of what you want to get? So starting yourself off and looking at what's in your kitchen is a big one. Like, do you have the fruits and vegetables to help provide that healthy fiber? So starting off with those, like packing snacks or pre-cutting your vegetables and fruits so they're easy to grab during the week. That's something that almost anyone can do. It just takes a little bit of time. Also, like Pete said before, like packing a snack after maybe a post long run, so you have that nutrition right after. And if you're getting something with that protein and carbohydrate after you run or exercise, you're less likely to crave something sugary, starchy, or salty. So that's those little tips to help you prep along the way. A big one I teach people is reading the nutrition label. Knowing what is in your products is a huge one that almost any person can do. So that's with a lot of things that, especially on labels, like knowing maybe looking at the sugar. So especially with like goos and gels and sports drinks, if you read the nutrition on them, it's all different types of sugar in there, and we don't necessarily need that. So looking at what we're eating, trying to eat more real food throughout the day, and knowing, when you can have something like a product like UCAN that help you with that sustainable energy can all fit your lifestyle.
Great. Nutrition is so individualized. Pete, what are some takeaways you would offer to our running community?
The first one might seem a little odd to hear, but and we haven't said it yet out loud, which is food should be enjoyed.
Yes.
It's as much as we talk about having whole grains and having fruits and having vegetables, and all those things are important, in everything in terms of healthy digestion and making sure your tummy's okay, and having, great antioxidants in our diet and all those things. But food is meant to be enjoyed. And I would say to everyone who's listening, I don't want anyone to listen to this or watch this recording and say, well, I can never have another slice of pizza again. That's not true in any way. It's as with everything else, everything in moderation, and making smart decisions. Hydrate well, make sure that you're getting enough fluids throughout the day, eat healthy grains, eat fewer things that were invented after 1970. In terms of those real foods that Lauren was just talking about. And it's one of the reasons, and they don't pay him to say this, one of the reasons that we love UCAN so much here at ZAP is, again, it's simple starch, it's no sugar, and it keeps your tummy feeling good. And it's something that's convenient to be able to take. But my big takeaway for everyone is eat when you're hungry and be smart about your decisions, but enjoy food too.
That's great. Eating real food
Yeah.
enjoying food, hydrating, and eat when you're hungry. That's simple. I can remember that. That's good. And what about you, Lauren? What are a few big takeaways that our athletes need to know?
Yeah, I mean, just to go off of that, food should be enjoyed is the biggest thing. A lot eating when you're hungry, having that time frame of trying to have that meal or snack every 3 to 5 hours can help prevent against like mindless eating or snacking throughout the day. But that can also help your body. It can help you fuel in the right ways as well. Some other tips I always tell people, simple messages to help slow down in the eating process is put your fork down between each bite. Have that conversation with your family, whoever you're eating dinner with, or even taking time for yourself and slowing down that meal time, really focusing on chewing. It can help your digestion too. And if you're slowing down your food intake, you might eat a little bit less along the way too. But I think also, diet culture and everything is, very prominent, especially in the world today and in running and exercising. But knowing if you're wanting something like a treat, or there's nothing wrong with having a slice of pizza, but allowing yourself and enjoying it and not beating yourself up is one of the biggest things that, I help with clients emphasize, because we want to create that healthy food behavior, and part of life is then enjoyment of food. So there is a difference in if you're training and trying to be very tailored, but what also helps people in that restoration process between training cycles is to, let yourself enjoy things a little bit too.
That's great. Thank you so much.
That's good advice.
This has been so helpful for me, because I think especially as we build our calories, we think it's okay to get away with a lot. But I think one of my biggest takeaway, Pete, was your reminder is to do it well, right? We invest a lot of time as athletes into our training. And so if we're going to do that, let's do it right. And let's make sure we're investing that time in our nutrition as well. And so that when we come to the table as athletes, which helps how we come to the table as family members, as professionals, we really want that complete picture. And so let's train right, let's eat right, and really put our best foot forward so that we can achieve the potential that we're meant to have wherever we're at in our cycle. So Lauren, thank you so much for joining us and sharing our expertise. I know that nutrition is such a hot topic, an important topic for athletes as they're growing, whether it's that 5K run walk or that 100-mile finisher. It matters. Thank you for helping us out today. Yeah. And as always, thank you to UCAN for providing this series so that we can be our best athletes out there on the course.